What I thought I would talk about tonight, or today, first of all, saying hi to everybody who happens to be out there waiting on us. We have nothing but experiments on what programs work with what, how you can mess up. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was drywall. You know, drywall is in a number of situations, commercial, residential, including mobile home. And so what I wanted to talk to you about is, first of all, my history, my experience with it. My father was very capable, very multi-skilled, but he was a master electrician. Or when I was growing up, he was a very good journeyman, and later on became a master, who started his own business and everything else. So he was teaching me things like carpentry at an early age, how to use a handsaw, things like that. But he really wasn't teaching me about drywall. Later on, he got to be partners in a concrete business. We did commercial work. Again, that had nothing to do with drywall. So you might say, well, how do you know anything about drywall? This is where I'm going to tell you. We'll say about the time I was 19, I left home with my mom's tears in her eyes, thinking for sure something bad was going to happen to me. And I went to Austin, Texas. And there, I decided that I was going to work for a concrete company or a construction company that did bridges, sewers, curbs for big subdivisions, and so on and so on. There's a company named Parker & Rogers. And I worked for them until it just didn't work any further. And I have been working off and on my grandmother's place after I got home with my uncle, who had always been trying to get me to come to work with him because he liked my work ethic, my willingness to do anything that I'm asked of, very polite, very energetic, not trying to dodge any responsibilities. If it was my fault, it was my fault. I was quick to take it and willing to work hard. So he took that little bit of knowledge working with me and experience with me, and whenever my job in the concrete business was going south because of the people, not because of me, people in charge of me directly. It's a very good experience, but it was time to move on. And I took him up on the offer, said, okay, I'll come to work with you. We actually rode together, and he was foreman of probably 40 or 50 guys on the commercial job, three-story buildings in Austin. And that would be about, I want to say 81. And the first thing that they put me on was by myself. Here's a pair of snips. Do you have your other tools? Tape measure, pencil, knife, pouches, and he snipped. I said, yes, sir, I do. So, okay, come with me. I'm going to go up to the second floor of this other building where nobody's at. And there's this great big bundle, big bundle, like 4 foot high, 5 foot high, and 5 foot across bundle of metal studs, probably 10 foot long. And I'm going to have you cut these up into this long. You measure it, and you cut it. This is where you cut it. This is how you cut it, and you'll get better and better with it. And when you see you do one, I do one. Oh, you got to do it this way, and then you go this cut here. So I started out with metal stud, and I cut the whole great big bundle, which is a big old stack of metal stud by myself. Took my break, came in and said, hey, it's break time, 9:30. Started at 7. and went back up there and did it again, and I probably didn't finish till about 2 o'clock, which we knocked off at 3:30. 30-minute lunch and 3:30 we go home. But I finished about 2. They like, oh, hey, you did good. We thought you were gonna give up. What they didn't know is I'd used both hands, got my right hand sore and started to cramp up, got to my left hand. I cut the whole bundle up, went back to my right hand, cut it all up, and it was good. They gave me a crash course on how to cut metal stud. What does that have to do with drywall? Well, we started doing metal stud, then we did commercial drywall. Now, commercial drywall, you don't lay the drywall down, and it usually is type X and 5/8. 5/8 thick, not half inch like you would see in a house. So here I am carrying really awkwardly, didn't know how to carry drywall at all. And I was with this guy who was shorter than me and temperamental, going through a world of drama in his own home. And so I worked with him. Now I was 6'2", and he probably was 5'7". Really, really hot-headed, red-headed guy. But he liked me because I had the work ethic to do whatever. I had to learn how to use a screw gun, which I didn't. Going from concrete work or doing electrical work, I didn't have any knowledge. So here I am, learning how to use a screw gun and screws. Clumsy as all get out, just clumsy. So my uncle said, hey, if you want to get good, take home a box of these screws and drop them into a pan. So I sat there in my chair at my grandmother's place, which I really didn't stay there much. I slept outside in a shed and later on in a camper. Not because she didn't want me there. Later on she didn't want me there. But I was trying to be on my own. So I would sit in there in her chair when I had a chair, and I could just spin these screws into my fingers and then get it to the right point and drop it. Spin it, drop it, spin it, drop it, spin it, drop it. So it took days of me going on after working all day with it. I learned how to get drywall screws spinned up in my fingers pretty quick, my left hand. And later on I did framing screws, which you use to put the metal stud into the metal track. That was my first and clumsy start into drywall. We didn't use routers. That came on later, say 10 years later. Everybody was cutting everything by hand, so you cut it around metal boxes, and you cut around the edge of that lip of that metal box. And you might cut it where it's right up on the edge of that opening, but you would cut it inward at an angle, and then you cut, and you clean it up, and then you got to measure it right, or it won't go on there. Which these guys were really good at what they were doing, and didn't make many mistakes. And then you start off with you're standing up the sheets, not laying it down, and you screw it off on the bottom where they go up against. The guy on your journal generally pushes the drywall to the left, bumps it up against the other one, and you put your screw where they bump up about 4 feet, 5 feet, and then you go down to the right-hand corner and you screw off the bottom. So you're like a triangle. You start at the bottom, go up, and then screw over here. And then you hope to get as many screws as possible in that sheet before he brings the next one. So again, over and over, hanging drywall and cutting the drywall to fit. And then if it's off a little bit, you just carve at it. So this was a big, wide open world for me. I didn't know very much about it, but here I was getting a crash course. I mean, I was pushing on the screw gun so hard that several times when I missed the stud, I pushed the screw gun nose through the 5/8 drywall. And they said, hey, you don't got to push that hard. I didn't know. I thought everything had worked hard at it. So I learned later on to be very quick. So I went through all types of soffit, fascia, framing, hanging, commercial. Got into where we're doing instead of just acoustical ceilings, I actually make an acoustical grid that you hang drywall on. I did that. I worked on high rises, and I did core board, if you know what that is. That is 1.25 inches thick by 16 inches wide board that could usually be 12 foot, but you put it in between H studs, and that goes around your elevator shafts. And I could go on about my experiences with that. It is elaborate, and it has its own rules as far as making sure all joints are covered with metal and then later on sealed up from the outside, so that no fire is going to get through for at least an hour to 2 hours. Sometimes I say 5 hours, but it's meant to hold up to a whirlwind of fire on the outside. If it ever gets inside, it stays inside. I also did a lot of Rayco systems, which was a brand. That is where you didn't have to finish any drywall. It had the wallpaper already on it, commercial grade wallpaper wrapped, and you had a aluminum discussion. You put your metal stud in, and it had a gap on both sides, and you slide the drywall up inside of it. And in theory, these clips that you would put on the backside of them, you would not see anything screw-wise to give you any idea how that's held up. And there's no drywall finishing at all. Of course, mind you, I hadn't been doing any drywall finishing, just the hanging, and it was rough at it. So we got into core board, which really needed somebody to cut very well, and eventually I got very good at that. A lot of walls that were 3 and 4 layers. We did a lot of exterior board on high-rise buildings and single-story buildings. All that drywall generally cuts the same. You cut through that paper, and then it will break, and then you cut the backside. It is fragile. With the exterior board, quite often we did a lot of rounded corners. That was the thing back then. We would wet those boards down so they would shape to it. It's pretty interesting to watch drywall bend and then fasten it. I ended up doing a lot of that for other people. Everybody got real fascinated with staircases that had rounded walls around them. And then I ended up doing a lot of, later on in my career, I did a lot of arched ceilings and did a lot of that with 1/4 inch drywall. And so I had a crash course in all the different kinds of commercial drywall. That was where I got my first experience being a foreman at age 19. Maybe it was almost 20. It wasn't because I was really qualified. It was because my only qualification that was of any use to them is I showed up every day. Whereas everybody else was late or might not show up at all. You never could depend on them. We can count on this guy. Here's what we want you to do. Just take it over. So what I did was say, hey, I know I don't know as much as you, but you know a lot about this. How about you do this section? Or you advise me what we need to do. And sometimes these guys would give me a little bit of lip, but they would generally help out because my humility. So now, I've done all kinds of elaborate drywall in Austin area before I moved over into East Texas. And he's digging a wall. Yeah. I ended up working on a grocery store with a gentleman there. And then I also went back to working with my father doing electrical work. And later on, I did a lot of foreman level electrical work on grocery stores, mainly Safeway. And then went back to drywall. There's a lot of story in between. Probably a year and a half, 2 years later, I was back doing drywall and commercial drywall. I did that for quite a while. Ended up being a foreman in hospitals. I did a lot of hospital work, a lot of oncology centers there for a while. But because of my qualifications in all the paperwork that I had set up on how to do things to be inspected at 40% and 80%, I think they got rid of the 40% now. I ended up doing a lot of really elaborate operating rooms, and where you had to wear booties and full suits and masks and everything, so they didn't want you to get any kind of foreign things in that operating area, even though they're making dust. And by the way, I worked on metal stud, elaborate metal stud in Orlando, working on MGM. I worked on Splash Mountain in Epcot. I worked at Universal Studios when it first started. And I did a lot of exterior drywall there for the facades. I ended up being a foreman in that town, and I could go on and on without trying to be a braggart. But I did a lot of really elaborate sound stages and facades. The King Kong facade, the Pennsylvania Station facade, the Paramount Theater facade. I could go on. But I got a lot of experience in doing elaborate metal stud drywall. But I also did a lot of drywall on houses in the afternoon. Say we would knock off at 3:30, and all the guys, hey man, you want to go hang a house with us? We go make some extra money hanging houses. Well, along the way, they said, hey, do you know how to finish? I'm like, no, I don't know the first thing. I've seen guys use the finishing tools, but I don't know the first thing about it. Actually, hanging houses is quite different. You're using a half-inch drywall. You're using long 12-foot sheets. You're laying everything down. It's very different. So when somebody goes from hanging drywall in a house to hanging on the commercial side, they usually try to bluff you into saying, hey, I'll do hanging more drywall than anybody you got. Is they assume that because they are pretty quick in housing, that they're going to be very quick in commercial where it's wide open. But it's a bad assumption, because the quality that you're required to use and the weight of the material and the thickness of the material, it's not the same thing. But I did a lot of residential houses. My reasoning was, well, if I'm working, it's kind of hard to spend money. So I literally save money by working instead of spending. So I would work hanging houses all along. And when I got to the Orlando area, it wasn't any different. Now, before I left Florida, I went back to Ocala area and was a foreman there. So whenever I finished up my job, they would say, hey, we need you to go to this other job, because they didn't want to lose me to some other company. Because I learned early on not to be loyal to them, because they weren't loyal to me. They just ended up handing me 2 checks. Hey, see you later. We're laying everybody off. So believe me, I learned that commercial business, or just business, and generally is not loyal to you. So they did not want to lose me because of my attitude. You know, I'm not going to sit home and wait for them to call me. I'm going to work somewhere. So I was working as a foreman in the commercial electrical, and as a foreman for multiple companies, including a general contractor for a while, rebuilding banks, lobbies, and things like that. So I got a chance. They said, hey, go over here and do some drywall finishing. I don't have a drywall finish. Yeah, well, you're going to learn. Just go over there, and we'll pay you the same wages you've been getting paid as a foreman, but you're going to drywall finish. They just didn't want me to go anywhere, because they knew I would if they sent me home. I would be working the next day. So I went over there, and of course these guys did not want to teach me anything. I'm not going to teach you. You'd be trying to take my job. They were really bad teachers, generally. But I paid attention, and I put my hands to it, and I got it all over me. Did everything wrong. Of course, they told me about it, but I got better and better and better. And as time passed, that helped me as a foreman because now I knew what to expect with drywall finishers, what they can do, what they should do, how much mud they're going to use, what layer of quality I should be expecting from each individual. And believe me, drywall finishers are the biggest whiners ever, complainers big time. They got a different name for that. Now, as a foreman now, if somebody said you can't do it, then I would literally put on the tools and do it. So now I'm not only doing drywall at these houses, I'm hanging drywall and finishing. And guess what? Texture too. Started doing texture. And I was really fascinated with the textures in Florida because there was a lot of hand textures. In commercial, they didn't want to do any texture. If they could, they would do no texture at all, which means very, very, very good finishing. Okay. Orange peel hides a lot. And all your hand textures on the ceiling, the popcorn on the ceiling, that all hides a lot of sins. You can get away with sloppy finishing. That is something that I learned also. Along the way, I picked up some habits from a few of the guys and put it together myself so that I don't finish with just a regular 6 and go do one side of all the butts, one side of all the angles. I put on the 6 and pull off with an 8 so I can do both sides of the angles, both sides of the butts. That way I'm ready for whenever that dries for the next coat. I don't have to. What you generally would do is go do one side of all your angles in the corners, in the ceiling, and then you come back the next day and then you do all the others. Well, I would do the whole room and come out, butts, flats, angles, nails, laid on the second coat, and I would finish a room at a time. It seemed like I was slower to tell these guys because they were only doing one side of the butt, one side of the angle. But I picked up from this couple of old timers what they did. Not many of them did, but what they did. And I said, man, that's cool as all get out. So that's what I do. I finish both sides of the angle, both sides of the butt, and it takes even more skill to do that. The hand textures were really neat. There's crow's foot, sunburst, Spanish lace, popcorn, orange peel, on and on. There's a lot of different ways to make. There's sponge finishes, heavy knockdowns, knockdown orange peel. And I also ended up picking up plaster, but I'm not going to spend all that. I never ever drew unemployment. I filed for it in Orlando, and I actually got a job before I even got the first check. So I didn't ever get any unemployment. So I also learned how to do plaster, which, it seems kind of off the character or off the subject to talk about plaster, but in 40s and 50s, they used a type of drywall with holes in it to replace the lab, the little wood strips that you put the plaster on. And also, the same guys who did metal stud and drywall did lab, which later on became, say, in the 80s, we were doing a lot of diamond mesh and K-lab. And so I ended up learning how to do that. Because of that, I worked with an old man, just me, he and I, we were doing houses and commercial buildings. He said, you can learn how to use my tools or get your own and learn how to use those, but you got to keep me filled up. So I learned how to do hard coat, which is on drywall, another finish. You don't see much of it anymore. It was more of a hospital thing, but a lot of government buildings wanted it because it was really easy to clean. So you cover the whole of the drywall with it. So I have had these experiences with all the different textures, Not everyone, probably something out there that I have not done. Green board, blue board, 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, all the way up to 1 1/4 inch, multiple layers, in commercial and residential. I've also done drywall, which is mostly 3/8 in mobile homes, and I believe that is because they're trying to save weight. It's really, it wouldn't be any other reason. But if they keep that weight down, then they can make that house lighter going down the road. Maybe not break up as much. Believe me, there's a lot of engineering in mobile homes. So when they hang the drywall on the ceiling, I learned a whole nother world of things that you have to know. I had already learned how to patch drywall in commercial, blowout patches and hard patches and patches for ceilings, and it's a whole other world just doing it in hospitals. So along the way, I got into a couple of mobile homes. I'm like, wow, this is pretty wild. Really fragile stuff that kind of bowed in between every stud. So I had a lot of learning to do when it came to mobile homes. But the biggest one I had to learn was, why in the world is the ceiling coming down in funny cracks, diagonal sometimes across the ceiling? How is that happening? So I learned that what was going on is that at the factory, they would lay the rafters in sections, say 4 rafters, 5 rafters, 6 rafters at a time, maybe more. And they would spray a spray foam type of spray foam on these rafters upside down, and then just lay the drywall on it, and then swing it up and put it on top of the mobile home walls. Why is that relevant? Well, whenever there gets to be a lot of heat from the sun on that roof, that spray foam starts breaking down. And when it does, it lets go in one place, and it starts, coming down because of the weight, and then it cracks along that edge, and then runs over to another place, or right beside a rafter. It really has to do with how much weight that drywall will handle, or how much that spray foam will hold. Sometimes that spray foam is less than a 1/4 inch thick, and other times it's an inch thick. So it's the most crazy thing you'll ever have to deal with. You end up having just getting one side of the drywall to match your patch. You got to get it all level. You got to cut out foam, a lot of spray foam, a lot of times. The drywall in a mobile home, particularly in the 90s, is a massive lot of work. It's a big learning curve. But blowout patches are the same. And whenever I took the batten strips off, guess what? They ran those sheets up and down just like commercial, not like residential. They ran the seams up and down, but they put a batten strip over it. So I got to where I was offering to people, hey, I can take those batten strips off and hammer down the nails and staples and finish it, and it won't be nowhere near as visible every one of the joints. And most people are willing to, if you could do that, it'd be great. And I think there should be some videos doing that. And then we could put hand textures on, which I encourage hand textures because the general person doesn't have to have compressor, hose, hopper, and then the skill to spray it on. You don't have to protect all the walls that you don't want to get that spray texture on, either on the ceiling or on the walls. You can just do it by hand. You can just protect a small area. You don't got to worry about everything getting blown around and drywall blood getting sprayed onto it. And you can patch it pretty easy with that same type of brush and the same type of mud. So I highly recommend you look into different kinds of hand textures. I think that would be really a bonus for most people who are doing work on their own home. So look into hand textures. Or when you work on the rentals, it's the same thing. My particular viewpoint now, when it comes to rentals, is I have kind of stopped putting drywall back where drywall got broken. I'll take out a section of that drywall and I'll put OSB in. That OSB is 5/6, just under a half-inch thick, and they won't be able to put their fist through it, and they won't be able to kick it. Okay, it's going to hurt them, and then I can just spray texture on it, finish it like as if it had no recess, just all butt joints, and spray texture and paint it. And you really can't tell that it's half-inch or 5/16, what is that? 7/16 drywall or OSB. So that's what I'm doing now on my own rentals. Is I don't want to deal with. And by the way, you can hang a picture anywhere. I think because in drywall you end up tearing it out because that's holding too much weight. The drywall just fall apart. So if I put that plywood, that OSB on, and then texture, they can put a nail anywhere. You can hang a cabinet on the wall. Everything's good. So I've kind of gotten away on my rentals from putting in drywall anywhere. I personally think that drywall for me on my personal rentals and such is not the best way to go. I know I'm going to get some backlash from it. Believe me, though, when it comes to rentals, drywall is the most fragile thing out there. The second most fragile thing on a mobile home is the floors. The particle board floors cannot stand the water. So water is not good for drywall either. And when you get a roof leak, then guess what? That drywall will deteriorate. So what are you fixing that brown stain from a roof leak? What are you fixing that drywall with? Well, you paint it and it bleeds right through. Man, what do I do? Well, they have an oil-based kills called Upshot, and that's what you spray on that, and that seals that from bleeding through the paint. It's called Upshot. It's literally made so you can spray it up, and it seals it off. But you could do it with kills also. It has to be an oil-based kills or stain blocker, an oil-based stain blocker. Keep in mind, when you seal those with this oil-based, if you see that can and read it, it has flammable on it. And it is flammable. I have not had the issues that I've heard other guys have where they go to spray inside of a water heater area and then boom. Okay, so it is flammable. I've had to repair where people were spraying with lacquer on cabinets, and they forgot about the pilot light on the stove, and they forgot about the pilot light on the heater, or anywhere else that gas is, say gas water heater, and it eventually gets there and it catches all those fumes. So when you're using Upshot, or Kills, or Zinsser, whatever it is it's using for a stain blocker that is oil-based, keep in mind that's generally flammable. But that's what you will need to use, an oil-based stain blocker on drywall to block out magic marker, which is oil-based, or ink pens. All of those things end up being a problem for drywall. There's a lot of ways to patch drywall. You can put a piece of wood behind there, put a screw on each side, then put a, after you've cut it out, square around, whatever you want to do, and then put your drywall and fasten it to that piece of wood. Being very careful not to break the screws that are holding it on either side. And I think I've probably got a few videos on how to do that. If not, I'll get you some. When it comes to drywall finishing, there is no easy way. You may have seen the Ames tools on finishing houses and such. Comes with tubes and all kinds of rollers. You get a lot done in a hurry once you get used to it. The problem with Ames tools is that it will blow your back. You've got less than 5 years and you'll have your first surgery. In less than 10 years, you'll be permanently done. You won't be able to do it anymore. So it's all the movement in those tubes that you're using is on pivoting your lower back, your middle and lower back. Lots of action, lots of movement. You make a lot of money, but you're going to lose your back. So you don't want to use that. Now, when it comes to drywall finishing, once you do it, I would not. There are a lot of guys who are fussy about what kind of tool they use as a 6-inch knife. There are a lot of guys like using the Red Devil 6-inch knife. It's a good knife. If you're going to do drywall finishing all the time, I recommend you not use the same knife or blade or handles over and over. And you have to get away from this, I only use this brand. If you do that year after year, you'll end up with carpal tunnel. I don't have any problems in my wrist at all, no finger problems. And that is because, and another thing is these guys will say, hey, you shouldn't use stainless steel knives because the knives, if they're stainless, they don't bend as much, and therefore it'll be harder on your hands. And that is true. The reason I use stainless first is that if I don't use it for a while and it's not stainless, it will rust. Now I've got pits, even though I've sanded it. Now I can put oil on it and it'll stay on there for a while. But I'm telling you, the key to long lasting using your hands is not use the same handle or tools and reposition change the location of your hands so that you don't use the same thing all the time. But I'll also tell you another thing. Hanging drywall is painful. There's nothing easy about it. It may be simple, but it will make you grow muscle. And that's how you gain, is by painting. It's hot, dirty work, and then the finishing is constant pain in your hands. I know that sounds like I'm complaining, but I'm not. I'm telling you, holding a pan in your left hand and finishing out of your right it will be a constant dull pain. It's just never ending. Also happens to be that along the way I learned the plaster. I also learned how to finish drywall, although not as well. I could do it with a hawk and trowel. I use Marshall pound for everything, and I can use all the different sizes. It's again a different game. You don't generally use as much wet mud when you do a hawk, which is a flat surface, and the trowel. You lean the hawk into the trowel, and you end up getting it and you spread it with that, and you end up having to shape your trowel so that it will work the way you want it to. Unlike a finishing knife, you can flip it and use it on both sides. It's a whole other game. Further up north, they use more hawk and trowel, and in the middle of the country, in the south, maybe in the west, it's finishing knives. And then we kind of got away from using keyhole saws and razor knives to cut the drywall around the holes around the boxes and such, all the penetrations, and everybody got into routers. I have seen some pretty interesting injuries because guys got too comfortable with routers. One of them being that if they had long hair, it got caught in the router and it just up into the hair. Others would be getting burns into their fingers because they slipped over. And there's a lot of bad things happen to electrical wires inside boxes. The guys are routers because they don't care. I think routers are an interesting, good way to do things if you're going to do a lot of electrical boxes. Say a whole house. But again, you have to learn how to use it. You're going counterclockwise most of the time. You're going to use special bits. You're going to start into the middle of the box. You mark where that box is. You go in, hit the lip of any of the outside edge, lift it over, go back onto it, and then go around and cut it drywall classes. Really makes a tight fit. It also leads to a lot of things getting covered up. An electrician doesn't find it. Then there's always a battle between the electricians and drywall people. And generally it can be up to them, but they can be polite and get along. And generally they don't care. They're going to do whatever it takes to get through, and it gets up into fisticuffs. A lot of times, depending on where it is, you have to use thicker drywall. So now you're seeing use thicker drywall on the ceiling. And that's to try to keep things straight and also to give you a fire code, longer time for the fire to last. It's amazing to me to see these brick homes catch on fire and burn down. It has to be, I mean, the insulation is fireproof, the drywall is fireproof. It has to be that the fire catches up inside the attic and catches the wood on fire, but it really has to be some kind of flame. But this last week I've seen 2 brick homes, big brick homes, that burned right in the middle of them. So I don't understand why the drywall is becoming such a, it's not being enough of a retardant to catching a house on fire. It should stop a house from being on fire. But I guess all the contents of the house catch on fire. Or maybe the air conditioner just sets the attic on fire. But that is, in brevity, the world of drywall. There is a lot of things to learn when it comes to cutting, getting your speed up, using your pencil and tape measure to get straight lines, how to use your tape measure. There's a lot of skill in metal stud and drywall, just drywall, which is what we're talking about today. There is a lot of skill. And it is a lot of wear and tear on your body. So 30 years ago when I went to the chiropractor, he said, you got a lot of gray stuff right here in the middle of your back. What have you been doing? So I told him, I've been making commercial. He said, you're going to end up with a lot of issues whenever you slow down with your middle back. All that is swinging drywall. Now, I don't just do that anymore. I don't just do drywall. I do a wide range of things, and I am thankful for it because it has allowed me to last this long. I do a lot of different things so I don't wear one part of my body out more than the other. At this point, I don't have any kind of corporal tunnel or any kind of bad, hands are good, fingers are good, shoulders are good, knees are good, ankles, everything is good. I have a 2.5-inch pin in my foot. But if I had just done drywall, I promise you, I would be wore out by now. I would be a foreman for sure. So maybe if I never really was going to be just a drywall guy. I was foreman a whole lot. But if all I did was drywall, I would be very fortunate to make it to 50. So it is hard work, guys. It is really hard work. And drywall finishing is not as hard on you physically as far as your back, your muscles and everything, but it's hard on your hands. Your hands will be wore out by the time you hit 50. Unless you started at 45, which a lot of guys graduate from hanging drywall to being the finisher. And then they complain all the time about their hands. But it is something to be respected. The skill to do drywall finishing is a true skill. It is not like getting on a bicycle and going downhill. There is nothing but hours and hours and hours. It used to irritate me and amaze me that I would have people, when I worked for my uncle, he would say, hey, take him along, let him work with you on this job, that way he'll learn how to do finishing. I said, okay, you do realize what you just said is kind of an insult. He goes, no, I didn't mean anything by it. Well, what you just said was he's going to learn everything it took me years to know. He's going to learn it in a day or so. Okay, that's not how it works. I'm telling you, hanging drywall with any kind of proficiency and finishing drywall and texture is a skill. So forgive yourself when you don't do as well as you think you would. Okay? Even if you watch somebody do it on YouTube, I promise you it's not as easy as it looks. So it's a wide open field. It deserves the respect from those guys who do it. And I am here to tell you that I'm proud of all those guys. They truly have the skills, not somebody to be looking down on. And because we don't have enough people to replace the ones who are dying off, we've not been having enough kids. Those guys are going to make a lot of money until their body gives out. They're going to make a lot of money. It's, I promise you, something you need to respect. Drywall is probably something that in the 50s you wouldn't have thought that would have been available. It has sped everything up, made everything lighter. So it is a good thing, but if we end up collapsing as population-wise, probably won't see as much drywall. Probably going to see more sawmills where somebody local has a sawmill and you go 100 miles to go get the wood and go put wood on the walls. I know you, but I'm telling you, it takes a huge place to make drywall. It takes a lot of machinery to make drywall. And as this world starts having less and less people, we won't have all those things. Respect those guys who do drywall. Hopefully you got an idea of when I tell you something about drywall that I actually do know something about it. I've been doing drywall work since 1981. All right, guys, I'm going to let you go. See you later.